That was stupid.
I know it was stupid.
Really stupid.
Hey, I just said it was stupid.
And for today's Daily Dose of Stupid, yeah, it's AOC. So I know that everyone was anticipating that based on the subject matter of our show today, but it is AOC again. I know she's been in the Daily Dose of Stupid a lot, but I can't help it. There's just a lot of stupid there. So here is AOC on the Virginia gun rally.
There's this gun rights protest that's happening down in Richmond.
Right.
And
on MLK Day.
On MLK Day. But here's the image that has struck with me the most about that, is that when we go out and march for the dignity and the recognition of the lives of people like Freddie Gray and Eric Garner, the whole place is surrounded by police in riot gear without a gun in sight. And here are all of these people flying Confederate flags with semi-automatic weapons, and there's almost no police officers at that protest. So who or what are our institutions protecting from who?
Wow. As I've said before with AOC, it takes talent to be wrong that much in a short amount of time. So gets virtually everything out of her mouth completely wrong. I will give her credit, though, because I do like to start off positive. She did say semi-automatic weapons, because there are a lot of her Democrat colleagues that will either say something like automatic, fully automatic, machine gun, fully semi-automatic, as CNN said. That was my favorite one. So AOC does at least get it right in saying that it's semi-automatic weapons. Of course, that's pretty much all weapons now, but the point is, she does get that one right. So 1 gold star for her. Everything else was wrong. And first of all, it was not planned on MLK Day as some kind of statement that these were going to be a bunch of evil white supremacists and they were doing it on MLK Day to be kind of a sneer or throwing shade at Martin Luther King. In fact, there were several signs out there with the protesters that were pro-MLK, one of which that I saw that was talking about how Martin Luther King Jr. was pro-Second Amendment, and by the way, he was. In fact, in 1956, he actually applied for a gun permit and was denied by the Democrats because they're the ones that enacted gun control in the first place, and they were the ones that pretty much controlled the South where he applied for that gun permit when he did so. They were like, nah, Mr. King, we'll take care of you. You should really just rely on police protection for that. Essentially the same line that the Democrats are using now. Now, I don't pretend that Martin Luther King Jr. was a Republican, nor do I pretend, because, I mean, he really didn't belong to either political party. And I don't pretend that I lined up with him on everything. There were some buddies that he had that leaned a little bit more socialist on the economic side, and I think some of his economic ideas were incorrect. I don't have to agree with everything the man said, but when it came to this issue specifically, Martin Luther King was definitely on the side of the Constitution, the founders, and in this particular instance, also the Second Amendment would be included in all of that, and he believed that people of all colors, should be able to exercise their constitutional rights. She does make one thing that I think we can take a lesson from. She does make a comparison that I think that we ought to look at, because she's saying, it seems wrong to me that there's this huge police presence when there's a Black Lives Matter protest and you're seeing no police officers when it's a whole bunch of people like this that are a pro-gun rally. Now, again, her facts are wrong because there were actually several police officers present. But let's just pretend for a second that she happens to be in the right. I've put together a montage. We're going to do a compare and contrast. The first one here is a compilation of a bunch of news footage from Black Lives Matter protest.
To reach, because I'm seen as this angry black person, or I'm seen as, I'm seen as this rioter or this looter.
Shut it down!
is a justified expression of anger, of frustration, of losing Black life at a consistent basis.
I said I'm tired of being peaceful and tired of being calm. You know, they've been going to war on us for over 400 years. So, hey, I ain't peaceful. I ain't no protester. I'm violent.
But by the end of the night, obviously, some emotions got maybe a little too heated.
Baltimore on fire. More than a dozen buildings and 100 cars were in flames last night, a fiery epilogue to the afternoon memorial for Freddie Gray. Watching the flames, heartbroken, the pastor whose church raised the money for the project.
Somebody who did this did not understand the investment. Somebody that did this did not understand my heart for this community. Somebody that did this doesn't know that for 8 years I've been working hard to bless this community.
And we cannot allow our city to devolve into chaos because of a small group of criminals that are moving throughout our city.
Freddie Gray's family had asked there be no more violence, but those appeals went unheard when in the late afternoon, young people, many of them high school students, began throwing rocks and bricks at police and targeting their vehicles. At times, police seemed overwhelmed, shields cracking and hurriedly reorganising lines of defence. On the street, a local DJ told us she was doing what she could to interrupt the violence.
I'm for the protesting, but in the right way.
There was a wave of looting. Crowds gathered to pull merchandise through shattered windows and doors.
A state of emergency is declared in North Carolina amid another night of unrest in Charlotte. What started out as a peaceful march in the city's uptown area quickly turned violent. Demonstrators threw objects at officers. Now, there were also reports of looting, and 2 employees at the nearby Hyatt House Hotel were assaulted by protesters. One person was shot and is in critical condition.
The National Guard called in after simmering tensions between police and residents boiled over. Take a look at this. Businesses and police cars set on fire, protesters hurling rocks at officers, and at least one of those protesters opening fire after police shot and killed a 23-year-old black man they say was armed.
As people ran for cover through smoke-filled mayhem, sounds of gunfire, the crowd targeting police.
Shots fired, shots fired. There's an injured officer here. Too many rocks coming.
This police car destroyed. Another up in flames. A gas station, an auto parts store, and a bank, 6 businesses in all torched. Businesses destroyed. 17 arrested, 4 officers hurt, a 16-year-old girl hit by a bullet in the chaos.
It was last night here in Dallas. Peaceful protests were underway after deadly police shootings elsewhere in the country. The demonstrations, though, suddenly rocked by gunfire, people running for cover. A fierce assault of gunfire. Police officers were being shot one by one, and when it was over, 14 people had been shot. 5 police officers were killed. It was the most deadly day for law enforcement since 9/11.
Hundreds of people racing for their lives. Screams and the sound of gunfire. Some hide behind cars. A woman runs, pushing a baby carriage. Officers, guns drawn, shuttling so many to safety.
Please, over there! Come on!
And sprinting themselves towards the gunfire. They were the protectors, but also the targets.
There's a verse by Jesus Christ where he's talking to his disciples and he says, "You will know them by their fruit." And a good tree doesn't bear bad fruit, and a bad tree doesn't bear good fruit. Well, I know that when it comes to Black Lives Matter, there were several incidents that went off where, by and large, looking at what happened, they were largely peaceful. That happened in several cities. But as we just saw, there were several cities where that was clearly not the case. And I don't believe that all people that were at Black Lives Matter marches were like these inhuman savages, which is the only way that I know how to describe this. I mean, they left those cities looking like a war zone, like Aleppo or Kuwait or something like that, or Baghdad. But when you look at that, that might be part of the reason that there was a significant police presence, because when you start throwing rocks at cops, breaking windows, breaking open stores, setting fires, burning down houses, burning down apartment buildings, yeah, well, you can kind of see why the police say, maybe we should get involved and we should probably bring our SWAT gear and shields. I mean, it's not an unreasonable thing, AOC, for this to take place when that's what's going on in your city. And what we saw in that clip and that montage, multiple people inside the movement that were threatening violence, and then the origin of the movement, which was Ferguson, Missouri, absolutely engrossed in violence. By the way, those clips came years apart, because there were riots at the initial event, and then there were also riots later with Black Lives Matter after the trial of the police officer that was involved. And then you also have multiple incidents of violence taking place afterward, not once and not in one city, multiple times in multiple cities. So you can kind of see why the police, when they hear that something with Black Lives Matter is going to happen in their town, yeah, maybe we ought to prepare for the worst. And by the way, those were all the clips that I was able to go through and find footage for, and I probably did. This is one of the most, tape-heavy, intense ones that I did, going through hours and hours of old news footage trying to find footage for this. This is some examples of some of the ones I didn't have time to include. Protests from Black Lives Matter that turned violent in Las Vegas, in Portland, in St. Paul, and in Memphis. I mean, you could go on and on and on and on, but the point is, AOC, when you have a group like that that has a long-standing track record of violence, that has a long-standing track record of the people in charge of that group actually calling for violence, and you have the origin of the movement absolutely baptized, the origin of it is cloaked in violence. Yeah, I'm going to say that we need police officers there armed up in full SWAT gear. And I don't think that that's an unreasonable thing to say. Now, compare what you just saw to this footage of the Virginia gun rights rally.
What you are seeing here is a scene of thousands, not hundreds, perhaps tens of thousands of people. So far, it has been very quiet. They are all here for one single reason, and that is they do not like having their rights when it comes to guns in any way stopped.
Northam out! Northam out! Northam out! Abort Northam! Abort Northam! Abort Northam! Abort Northam!
22,000 gun rights supporters came out today, many armed to the teeth, some dressed in fatigues. Others had handguns on their hips.
I carry it with me every day.
And rifles draped across their chests.
Flags held high, AR-15s slung over their shoulders. These protesters say they're here to fight for the future of their country.
Gun saves lives. I mean, it's obvious.
It's our God-given right to protect ourselves, our family.
It's America, right? We live free.
Virginia, the latest flashpoint in the gun debate sweeping the country.
I'm here to exercise the First and Second Amendment in defiance of the Soros-Bloomberg puppet that is Governor Northam, who openly brags about how they keep babies alive and harvest their organs. So I'm here in defiance of a real live ghoul that is attempting to trigger some type of civil war. He claims the gun groups here are going to hurt police. The gun groups are pro-police. It's Antifa on the left that are anti-police.
USA! 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 USA!
I want to hear you in the bird cage!
We will not comply! Never! We will not comply!
Today's protest was peaceful, but that's not what authorities were expecting.
Can I ask what that patch means? This one? The one that says RWDS.
You look it up. It stands for Right-Wing Death Squad, an expression the Anti-Defamation League says is used by some on the extremist right. The crowd protesting the state's efforts to overhaul gun laws.
As Virginia goes, so does the rest of the nation. That's what I believe.
Were you nervous at all coming out here today, given that there was a fear that there might be some white supremacist groups?
They don't. One, they don't bother me. Two, I'm not afraid of anybody, to be honest. I got God in my guns, so.
We will at the face. Look at the faces on this fake news. Look at his face. Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you. And you, and you, and you, and you.
Virginia is for lovers, not black-faced governors. Racist Ralphie's gotta go.
I'm also to remind everybody that Epstein did not kill himself. And if he had a gun, maybe he could have saved himself from suicide. We could have drained that swamp of pedophiles.
Were you able to identify any neo-Nazis or white nationalists when you were out there today?
No, not at all. And in fact, when groups like that infiltrate situations like this, typically it. They do make themselves public. But in this case, this wasn't the crowd for that. And we heard people who came here to demonstrate peacefully. They said that repeatedly to us. In fact, they were sort of offended about some of the buildup to this event. They were offended that those who are white supremacists were being associated with this gun rights rally. And so what we saw today were people who, yes, they were heavily armed. They were clearly trying to send a message, but we did not see anyone who professed to be a white supremacist.
Well, now there you go. In a crowd of 22,000 people, a reporter, they're somebody that is trained to observe and look through what's going on. He says, yeah, people were armed. There were a lot of people there. Not a single white supremacist in the whole thing. We couldn't find one. We were looking for them. Could not find a white supremacist anywhere in the crowd. And keep in mind, that reporter is a black dude. And you would kind of assume that if there were white supremacists around, he would kind of, know it because they would be yelling at him. And yet, despite all this, nope, not even a sign of white supremacists. In fact, when we did talk to people about that, they were offended that I even suggested that there might be white supremacists near them. It completely destroys the left's narrative that they tried to craft about this and tried to set it up. There was not an ounce of truth to it. Unless you think that I'm just taking the absolute worst from the Black Lives Matter protest to counter, and then showing only the best clips from what was going on in Virginia. No, actually, I specifically went out of my way to catch as many of the negative clips, the worst clips from Virginia, as I could, including the guy that's shouting at people, calling them fake news, the guy that's saying abort Northam, which, by the way, this is an interesting one. By suggesting that there was something wrong with that guy saying abort Northam, the only way that you can say that, and by the way, I don't think that that was a good thing to say. I don't think that that's a guy that is helping his cause by doing so. You kind of have to admit, though, to say that that is wrong, that saying abortion is an act of violence. Because if you don't think that an abortion is a violent thing, then there's nothing wrong with him saying abort Northam. But abortion is a violent act, and that's what I believe, and that's one of the reasons that I think it was wrong for that guy to shout at him. Saw the guy that was comparing Northam to Hitler, which again, if it's a bunch of neo-Nazis, why would comparing Northam to Hitler be a bad thing? So even the worst parts of this, even the ones that would be the least palatable to the average person, that they would say that those guys are being rough or those guys are being mean, even those point to the fact that there were no white supremacist or violence in there. And ultimately, even though there were some people there that were a little, emotions were running a little bit too high and they said some things that I don't think are helpful to the cause, it was still things they were just saying. These are people that, according to their own reporters on the ground, were armed to the teeth, certainly had the capability of doing great harm to people that they didn't like or that they didn't agree with, and not even one single attempt at violence. And we saw the newsreel that I just showed you of the protest that went on with Black Lives Matter, and there's buildings burning, cars burning, people getting hurt, people getting shot, innocent bystanders getting hit as collateral damage, police officers being murdered, and AOC wonders why there is a police presence when it comes to a Black Lives Matter protest, and there is no police presence, even though there was one, when it's a Virginia gun rally. Well, at a certain point you have to say scoreboard. Trying to compare and equate Black Lives Matter to the Virginia gun rally, there's just no comparison. And only somebody as brainless as AOC could have tried to make that comparison, because in making such a comparison, she shows how terrible her side is when you actually dig into it. The best that they could do was that guy that was wearing the RWDS patch. And even that, I think, is a testament to how good the vast majority of these people were. Now, if you were watching and paying attention, the RWSD, the right-wing death squad guy, they were asking him about his patch that he had on, and he would not answer them. According to the reporter, he was one of the extreme people on the outskirts, not actually in the protest. And he didn't even want to tell the reporter what it stood for. Which leads me to believe that this guy showed up. Maybe he is a white supremacist or somebody that's an extremist on the right. I don't know. Either way, he still didn't try to do anything dangerous or didn't try to hurt anybody. But he showed up to the protest, covered it up, tried to keep it concealed beneath his vest. You could only see the very top part of it. And then when the reporter asked him what it was, he's like, oh, just look it up. I don't want to answer that. That guy, who probably was an extremist, felt uncomfortable in a crowd of gun rights supporters. See, if anything, that's a great testament. The Black Lives Matter people, the most radical, were the ones leading. The ones that were most radical were the ones in the center of the crowds, leading the chants and leading people to commit these acts of violence. At this rally, the only extremist that they could find not only didn't commit violence, but he felt uncomfortable in that crowd. So much that he tried to hide that patch. There's just no comparison between the two of them. And what this whole thing displays is this, because you saw in the Black Lives Matter thing that there was all kinds of violence, all kinds of property damage, all kinds of people getting hurt. And the vast majority of those people, some did have guns, like the snipers in the Dallas police shooting. Several of them just had rocks or Molotov cocktails, everyday items that are not guns. And yet they caused all that damage, all that violence. The difference is the people. The people in Virginia had all kinds of guns. Could have done far more damage if they wanted to. They didn't want to. That's the difference. The difference is the person, not the gun. That's what AOC will never understand. Because the people didn't want to do anything bad. No bad was done. The guns don't make people evil. The people are the ones that make bad decisions and do evil things. And if you want a clear-cut example of that, you could find no better one than comparing Black Lives Matter to the Virginia gun patriots.
Just in case you were wondering, yes, I am a straight white Christian male and a small government constitutionalist, which means I have no chance of getting any help from the government and wouldn't accept their help even if they offered. Which means I'm going to need you to like and subscribe because my gun collection is not going to pay for itself.